Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, where we're going to take a behind-the-scenes look at social media, more specifically the media aspect of that, where we'll have a look at uploading content and transforming that content and how we utilize that content to the best of our abilities. Now, if you haven't heard of me before, my name is Adrian, and I'm a developer and a designer here in Australia. I'm actually from Perth, and this is the most isolated country in the entire world. What I've done is done a number of types of websites and applications and much more, building different types of startups, and being in the most isolated city. I know how important social media can be, especially to be able to connect with people and upload all the kind of content that I do. So what I thought would be useful would be to do this webinar where we do a sort of thought experiment of creating an example social media company and consider all the things that we should consider when we're trying to build this out. Because there's a lot to uploading content, and you might be surprised just how many things you might have to really do if you're planning to make something like this. Now, the learnings that we'll be having in this webinar will also help you figure out how to build your own company, even if it's not social media. For example, if you're just building a regular business website with ideas for having users that need to upload their images or other documents, this will still give you good insights as to how to do that really well and effectively and securely as well. So let's just jump straight into it. Now, as part of this webinar, we're going to cover 6 main topics. The very first one here will be about social media. So things like, what is social media? What kind of content are we uploading to social media? And lots more. Then we'll take a closer look at image content. There's a lot of things to consider when it comes to image content. Things like the file size and the file type and much more. We'll dig into that a little bit deeper down the track. There's also uploading files. This one aspect of social media is quite broad because there are so many things that we have to make sure users can do properly when they're uploading files. After that, we'll move on to features. Now, features here will be more specific to the images that we're uploading. And just images alone, there are a lot of things that you can apply as features. Things like transforms and scaling and resizing. If we're not even talking about documents, just images alone, we could continue building out features forever. But we'll try and be more specific about the most important ones here. After that, we're going to take a closer look at artificial intelligence. There are new AI techniques that you can use where you use machine learning to really take out some of the manual labor that people used to do, as well as making sure that your platform is secure. So we'll dig a little bit deeper into that. And finally, we'll take a look at copyright. Because as you can imagine, social media means also protecting the content that you're putting up there. And anyone can upload any content. So we'll learn a little bit more about copyright material on a social platform and how you can handle that properly. So let's just begin. Now, social media itself is a broad term. Features here will be more specific on new AI techniques that you can use where you use machine a little bit deeper down the you're just building a regular business website with ideas for having users that need to upload their images or other documents. This will still give you good insights as to how to do that really well and effectively and securely as well. So let's just jump straight into it. Now, as part of this webinar, we're going to cover 6 main topics. The very first one here will be about social media. So things like, what is social media? What kind of content are we uploading to social media? And lots more. Then we'll take a closer look at image content. There's a lot of things to consider when it comes to image content. Things like the file size and the file type and much more. We'll dig into that a little bit deeper down the track. There's also uploading files. This one aspect of social media is quite broad because there are so many things that we have to make sure users can do properly when they're uploading files. After that, we'll move on to features. Now, features here will be more specific to the images that we're uploading. And just images alone, there are a lot of things that you can apply as features. Things like transforms and scaling and resizing. If we're not even talking about documents, just images alone, we could continue building out features forever. But we'll try and be more specific about the most important ones here. After that, we're going to take a closer look at artificial intelligence. There are new AI techniques that you can use where you use machine learning to really take out some of the manual labor that people used to do, as well as making sure that your platform is secure. So we'll dig a little bit deeper into that. And finally, we'll take a look at copyright. Because as you can imagine, social media means also protecting the content that you're putting up there. And anyone can upload any content. So we'll learn a little bit more about copyright material on a social platform and how you can handle that properly. So let's just begin. Now, social media itself is a broad term covering a lot of topics. If you think about social media, you think about big platforms like Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and lots more. And what you'll realize is that a lot of these platforms have different specialities in terms of content. Some, for example, like Twitter, might be just text-based, but they're slowly moving into audio as well. Whereas other platforms like Instagram focus primarily on images. And then you move on to things like TikTok, where there's a lot of video content out there. Now, for each one of these, we have to consider a different number of aspects. And to narrow this down a little bit, I thought it'd be really useful to just focus in on images per se. Just uploading and utilizing images has a breadth of different types of features and functionality that we'll need to consider. So for this example here, I'm going to be going over different types of considerations for uploading an image, as well as using that image, transforming that image, and applying these AI techniques to it. So let's have a closer look at that. So images on social media is a big chunk of pretty much everything that happens. Whether you are on TikTok or Facebook or YouTube, every one of those needs you to upload images. Even if you were to build your own business application, you would be having a look at how you can utilize images to your fullest potential. Whether you're uploading them for avatars or just to use on a page or anything in between, images are a big consideration, and uploading and using them are something that we have to understand to use properly. So the very first thing that I consider when I'm uploading an image is the file type. I know it seems quite simple. A file type for an image is usually just a JPEG, but there's actually quite a lot of different types of files, and the file types can have a significant impact of how they're displayed and how they're used. To start off with, we've got images in JPEG form or PNG form. There's GIF and TIFF and RAW and BMP, and all of them work a little bit different. And that's just a few examples, but there's actually a lot more than just this. So what I thought it'd be useful is to understand why image types are such an important thing when uploading an image, especially with social media. You can't just let anyone upload any file and present it as an image. For example, there are things like GIFs. GIFs, right, are able to moving images, and they're a little bit more compressed than other examples of images. But that file type basically can almost present a video kind of content, where otherwise you might want a single image without any moving content. So in being able to, say, limit or consider how you would utilize a GIF, maybe only showing the first frame, is the very first consideration you might already need to consider when you're doing social media. The next thing is PNGs. If, for example, the content that you're trying to place up onto your social media platform needs to have a transparent background, a PNG would be a lot more useful than a JPG, which simply doesn't do background transparency. So there's quite a few aspects just to that one thing. But finally, with different types of image file types, you have to consider what will be the main one that you want to store. Because when you're storing an image in a certain type of file, then you're going to have to convert it. And converting it already is a transformation that you have to apply. And this means that you need some CPU processing, you might need to have an offloading server that can do that. There's quite a lot of things that come to converting an image. You might even lose resolution, you might need to actually down compress, for example, some of the differences between a JPG and a GIF, but the main reason here is that you need to really consider what you're going to do there. The next one here is the image aspect ratio. Now, as you can imagine, when you're building out a platform like a social media platform, you're going to have a fixed size for the width of your page, whether it is, for example, Instagram or Facebook. Let's take a look at those two examples. We'll notice that Instagram has a specific aspect ratio of 1:1. This means that most images that are uploaded to that platform always are squares, which seems a little bit boring, but this consistency has enabled Instagram to really play a vital role in presenting those on a mobile interface or a tablet or a desktop in a very neat way that is the same and consistent across the board. So this is why aspect ratio is so important. This is the same, for example, with avatars. Whether you're doing a social media platform or anything else, then the aspect ratio for an avatar also has to usually be 1:1. So that way you can crop a circle around the head, and that's the image that you're utilizing. But of course there are other aspect ratios too. 16:9, for example, is used by Facebook to showcase on a post, and while this might be slightly different, it works a lot for mobile devices which have a little bit more text to present. So understanding what aspect ratio you want to use and being able to then transform the image that you're utilizing for that aspect ratio is just another consideration, and we haven't even begun. Let's take a look at the next one. Space and storage. Now, there's quite a lot that you have to consider when it comes to space and storage. The very first thing is that every single type of image that you're going to be using might be completely varied in terms of space. Some people might have no idea how to compress the size of an image, making it ridiculously large, whereas other people might be uploading a tiny little thumbnail with almost no space at all. And really knowing and utilizing these files and saving them properly on a data center or whatever you're using is just another aspect that has to be considered when you're building out a social media platform or any platform. Now, because of this, one of the most important things that you can really do when you're building out a platform like this is create some sort of like a transform where you have a minimum and maximum size for your images. This way, when you're uploading them, or when a user is uploading them, and you're putting them onto a server, you always know the maximum type of quality that you're applying for them, and this might make it so that your server doesn't get overloaded, because if you do that, your server will run out of space, it'll turn off, it'll crash, or anything like that. It'll just mean that you're going to lose out on having your application live or online. Or if you're in the cloud, maybe you're using Amazon or something like that, you're going to have to pay a lot more money to host all of that data. So let's now move on to uploading files, because all of this stuff that we've talked about so far, about file types and aspect ratio and size and space, really are working towards what we're doing here, which is uploading the files themselves. Now, in terms of uploading the files, there's a few different elements I wanted to really discuss. The very first is the upload location. Now, this basically means that for a vast majority of users, they're uploading all over the world. And they're going to be uploading from different locations, some of which might have good internet connection, and some might not. And for some of these examples, they might have large images or they might not. And having an application in place that can really handle all the types of uploads all over the world, doesn't matter what type of connection you have, is quite important. And this also happens to this also happens to apply to devices too. Now, we've talked about different locations, but a lot of people have different devices. Now, a different device can be anything from a mobile phone being on iPhone or Samsung, but even more so, it can be a tablet, whether that is a Samsung device or an iPad, or maybe something entirely different, or even a laptop or a computer. There are so many different types of devices running so many different types of cameras, uploading in so many different types of connections, and having a system in place is really hard to do. What you need to really consider is how you can create a system that universally across the board can handle all of these situations. Now, as a developer, I know how hard this can be. There are frameworks and libraries out there, but there's really it's a difficult thing to find that something that can handle all use cases. But yet that is something you have to do if you're building out a large social media network. And if you have a look at some of these large examples, that's exactly what they do. Now, the next part of it is now storing all that information. We're now figuring out to upload is just one consideration. Storing, well, that's going to be hard. There are different types of storage providers out there, and they all work slightly different, but the main result is you can decide whether you want to store everything locally yourself or if you want to store it in the cloud. Now, if you're storing it locally, well, you're going to have to make sure that you build something that scales, and scales well, because you don't want to run a social media application or any business and then finally find out that you've run out of space. That's going to be quite difficult because you're going to be stuck trying to essentially scale resources that are physical, and that's extremely, well, it's tough. It takes days, weeks, months. Instead, you can go down the path of cloud resources. So these are things like, for example, the Amazon cloud or Google Cloud Storage or even Azure. Now, all of these work with infinite scaling, which is great. But when you're using this to upload images or videos, well, let's just stick to images this time. This is why space is so important and storage is so important, because as soon as you're using these providers, you're going to be paying for every single megabyte and how it's utilized. This is why you start trying to figure out your space and usage immediately and where you're going to use so that you can scale proportionally to it. So we finally had a image that we've set to a certain type of file format. Let's say JPG. We've changed the aspect ratio of it. Let's say we've done it 1:1 to keep things simple. And we've also compressed it and resized it, so maybe it's only 500 pixels by 500 pixels to a size of maybe 50 kilobytes. Now we have to deliver that content. And we don't have to just deliver it to one or two people. We have to deliver it to hundreds of thousands of even millions of people, not just in a single country, but all around the world. The delivery of uploaded media can stifle a business if they're not doing it properly, because it's constantly using data and uploading that to a different type of audience every single day. Some people might get these images immediately. Like, for example, if you're storing them in the US and delivering them to the US, yeah, that's great. But what happens to people in India or Europe or Australia? All of these people might be getting those images extremely slowly. So that's where we have to start looking at the delivery of this data. And this is where a CDN comes into play. Now, a CDN is basically a content delivery network, and it's made there to essentially cache images and allow different servers across the world to deliver them to users at mere fractions of the time that it would take if they were just stored in a single location. It also helps you understand how to limit the usage of your data, because a CDN can better access that content and deliver it at a lower cost too. This is why the delivery of uploaded content, especially on a social media platform, is often done with lots of CDN servers everywhere. Next up, we have media transforms. So now we're going to get into the features aspect of essentially doing all this social media content, because so far we've just looked at the data aspect, and the data aspect, well, that's not as fun as this aspect right now. Now, the features, the very first one that we have to consider for a user is the uploads themselves. Now, as a user uploading an image, it seems like the easiest things in the world. It's just a simple drag and drop. But to build a simple drag and drop like that, I, as a developer, know just how difficult it can be. Let's take a look at a regular website that is doing an upload. Now, an upload is really just a form, and a form has an input and a submit button. But yet, how many times do you see, like a Facebook or an Instagram, allow you to just drag and drop images in and they just work? There's a lot happening behind the scenes to make this work. If you want to change a simple form with a click to upload to have a drag and drop, allowing you to not just do one image, but multiple images, you have to build a lot of architecture in the background. And this is what people expect. And this is not just an expectation for social media. This is an expectation across the board now when you're building any type of website. And this is one of the most important things for users if they're going to be jumping onto a platform. Next up is the aspects that go behind the scenes when you're doing one of these form uploads. It's not just enough to now simply have a form that uploads content, maybe a drag and drop that allows you to do a single or multiple files. People want to see the progress of that file being uploaded. And this is where a progress bar comes into play. These days, when you have a look at an image you upload to Facebook, you see the little circle loading around that says that your image is being uploaded. Not only is this giving you visual feedback, you know once it's done, rather than have a random loading bar and you might be waiting, you're not sure if it's completed or not, you might think that even it's done and you find out that your image hasn't been posted. A progress bar is quite vital these days for any application so that users know that the feedback that they're getting of their upload is complete. The next one now is the preview. Now, as a developer, one thing that I know we have to do is show in real time what content is being made. And this is where a lot of, uploading per se, you give these users this progress bar, but after it's completed, you showcase the upload without having to require a page reload. So let's take a form, for example. If we had a regular form for a person to submit as a contact form, you might have a name, an email, a message, and you might want to upload a picture of maybe an error or something that's happening. And when you click to submit the form, all you have normally is a statement saying thank you for submitting the form. But when you're on social media and you're uploading an avatar, you can't just say thank you for uploading your avatar, please refresh the page to view it. That's just not what we expect in 2022. What we expect is fluidity. We want a user to be able to simply drag and drop an image in, not only for the progress bar to show you that it's complete, but for it to automatically update with that avatar in place after the upload is complete. So this is where thumbnail previews are so important to improve the engagement for users when they're using platforms like this. The next part is the enhance features. Now we're going to get into the good stuff, because so far we've been looking at uploading content, how the form and the submissions work, and now we're going to actually look at transitioning that content and making changes to it now that it's up in the cloud. And this comes in quite a few different types of aspects. The very first is the resizing. Now, we talked a little bit earlier about resizing being one of those vital things for image size. But there's a few different other aspects to resizing that I haven't yet talked about. The first is, for example, an avatar image. If you're resizing an image, for example, a website, if you're resizing an image for an avatar, you might want to center the face inside of the circle for that avatar. And this is where it's quite important to be able to move about and resize these and crop these into position. And it's one of those things that is just now expected when you're building out a social media platform, that you will be able to do this in the browser. What's more, you should be able to rotate the image a little bit. You should be able to flip it. All of these are basic image transitions, so to speak, that now are expected. And in the past, yes, I know that we could do these in Photoshop, but these inbuilt tools now are just a part of the general use cases of most sites. This you'll see as well apply in Google, in Facebook, in TikTok, in any website that you visit. The next is the file type. Now, we've already talked about transitioning the file types, so I'm going to move over to the quality. Now, as part of quality, an image might, for example, look great at, say, 5 megabits, and when you shrink it down to 50 pixels by 50 pixels, it might lose all that quality. Most cases, we're using maybe 1080 pixels by 1080 pixels, which is an example for Instagram. But what you might not know is that there is also a quality tab that you can apply, especially when you're doing JPGs from about 1 to 10, 10 being the highest quality and 1 being the lowest quality. Now, an image at 1080 pixels by 1080 pixels at 10 quality size will be almost a megabyte or two. It's quite large. And yet one at, for example, one quality size will only be about 10 kilobytes or 20 kilobytes, but you'll definitely notice a huge change in quality. And what ends up happening when you're moving to a social platform is that you want to actually have a middle ground here. You don't want the image to be too high in terms of the quality, nor too low, but you want it to be at a middle point where the quality is still there without a user being able to tell the difference. And this is where the quality is between the 5 and about 7 marker, where you get that good balance. The next part is filters. Now, Instagram. We know just how much people on Instagram utilize filters. It's probably the core to their business. And yet, something you might not realize is that a lot more organizations, such as TikTok as well as Facebook and others, are now implementing features like filters as a default. Even the iPhone, as soon as you take a picture, you have filters. If it's a Samsung, you have filters. At every step of the way on websites or apps, now filters are a vital component for that. So it's no surprise that you want to have that on a social media platform if you're building one out. Now, filters come in quite a lot of varied options. You have things like colors and shades, tints, hues, brightness, contrast, and these are just the basics. There's of course different types of filters where you combine the two with different types of names like opal or sunset, that you can create a creative look that you allow users to utilize straight away as soon as they upload an image to have a bit of consistency, and that's always fun. Next up is overlays. Now, overlays have been wildly popular with the event of TikTok essentially having text overlays whenever people talk. And this has also played a part in images and Instagram, with people putting their thoughts for the day with a nice background, or maybe drinking a coffee saying life is good. But overlays and borders and text are just another component of image transformations that people just now expect as a feature. And you might be thinking, well, why is this important? Well, it's important for a number of reasons, especially on a social platform where things are changing so often. You might have noticed that places like Facebook will allow you to add text overlays to images even after the fact. The same goes for YouTube, which often allows you to place comments as well as edit the video after the fact. And even TikTok allows you to jump in and change up your video as well as your thumbnail at any point in time. What this means is that the actual user themselves feels like they have more control over their content and how it's displayed, but on top of that, it actually provides a more engaging type of content for the audience that are consuming it. Because these days, people don't have time to listen to everything. Some people might be listening to their content without any audio, so they need that text to be displayed. Some people might just need some nice animations to make their content look more interesting, and lots more other aspects to it. This is why effects are becoming more and more of a standard now when it comes to social media. Personally, I would not upload a single video if it didn't have all of the animations in place that I wanted it to. The very first 10 to 15 seconds of a person's impression of a photo or a video or anything like that will really essentially drive whether there is going to be a conversion or an audience retention on that image. And this would probably be the most obvious when it comes to things like carousels on, for example, Instagram, where you'll notice that the most popular carousels have the effect of maybe arrows pointing to the right hand side with really good use of text that overlays onto the next image to get people to really scroll through them. The funny part is that while saying this is quite simple, saying that you want to have animations and text and having different types of overlays and effects, the actual real world situation is that none of these things are very easy to implement. Just creating overlays per se on top of an image that gets saved properly with maybe a filter on top is a very complex task, and it's not one that I would want to handle alone. If there are tools out there, for example, that can do it for me, that's exactly what I would be looking for, simply because of the fact that as we grow in the complexity of this application, as we're driving out more and more features as part of the image processing and storage and usage, we're getting to understand that there is a lot of work that needs to be done, and most places that need an MVP cannot wait 1 or 2 years for you to implement and create all of these from the ground up. Finally, we've talked about all these types of transformations, but what we haven't talked about is the performance that actually happens in the background. So another consideration is just making sure that whatever system you're using is able to handle such tasks well, whether it's on the front end for the user using it on a laptop or a device, or whether it's done on the back end in the cloud on the cloud servers. Each of these has different aspects to it, and it's just another consideration to really apply when you're building out a platform like this. And now we're going to move on to the fun stuff. And this is going to be stuff where we look at, well, let's say artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence. It's a topic that actually is quite interesting to me. I've even built my own artificial intelligence application, and it's mainly text-based, but it got me excited when I wanted to learn a little bit more about how it's used in terms of social media. And boy, was I surprised. There are so many aspects to consider, especially if you're building out a platform. The very first, and as you can imagine, most important, is object recognition. Object recognition is essentially whether you figure out if something's a cat or a human or an animal or not, or anything in between. It is the fundamental building blocks of what you're going to be using when you're grouping different types of content together. Because as you can imagine, as people are uploading content to the cloud, you're going to have hundreds, thousands, millions of photos and content that you'll need to group and access and also distribute. And this is where you can start being able to do all sorts of interesting things with the object recognition. While in principle, it just is maybe detecting the difference between a cat and a human, there's a lot of extendability to this. Let's have a look at the very first one, which I think is really cool, called image sentimentation. Now, this is essentially figuring out the emotion of a scene. And why is this important? Well, the fact is that most photos that we enjoy most are the ones where we are smiling or we are happy. And to actually identify those photos from maybe an upload list of 100 could be quite difficult. And yet the AI can take a photo of maybe 100 different cats and pick out some where the cat might be sleeping on the floor, and another where it could be sitting on top of a monitor with a happy face and another one with an angry face, and give you the best one to utilize. And that's pretty cool. It makes it a lot better for creating and grouping images, but on top of that, it can go a step further. It can even do image captioning, which means that when you do have all these photos and you don't have time to maybe put in a description for every single one of them, which can be difficult for both the user as well as the developer on the back end, what you can do is allow the AI to create captions for it. It's smart enough these days that it can literally caption cat sitting on top of a computer monitor, smiling, as an example. And that's very cool. And you can continue this on with maybe people in a scene, for example, doing a certain activity like playing soccer, and being able to organize this without someone manually doing so will give you the edge in terms of being a player in this kind of a space. Now, this is the kind of things that allows an AI to detect with some sort of threshold as to what type of an object something is. And it can actually pull this out into an object style with different parameters, giving you tags and lots more as to utilize in the background. Now, let's take a look at an example of this. Let's say you wanted to figure out if you've got a content like a bird. What you could do is apply a tag to see whether that's a mammal or whether it's in the air or whether it's in the sky. And you get a different percentage for each one of these and grouping them and ranking them as to how they work. But this actually can be taken a step further. For example, if you have content that you want to pull out of a photo, such as maybe you have a driver's license that people need to use to legitimately confirm their identity. You can use AI with OCR, which is character detection, to identify and capture that information and confirm that a user is legitimate. And this is just one of those examples where its impact can actually expand out to quite a few different areas, such as, for example, when a user is signing up on a social platform, you have the option of having people that are not really people but bots signing up. And this is a trouble that happens all over the place, especially things like social networks like Facebook, as well as YouTube and Twitter, and they come with malicious intent often. The only way to get around this is to really confirm whether a user is who they say they are. Now, for banking organizations and when you're doing work, then you often have to identify yourself using some sort of credentials, whether that is a driver's license or a passport. Having AI do OCR detection basically is akin to a better sign-up process. You'll find that a lot of the organizations, even YouTube themselves, require this sort of verification now when you're going onto their platform and you want to get monetized. You can't simply sign up with any old email address, but you have to confirm your identity with tax forms and much more. And being able to simply scan in that kind of identification and letting the AI basically scan through hundreds of thousands of people as they're signing through rather than manually doing it is just another benefit of making sure that you're using AI tools for your next social platform. And this can be then taken to the next level, pulling in information from their surroundings, whether it's street signs or cars or lots more. OCR is pretty cool, and it's just another thing that AI is bringing to the table. But it goes a step further. This step further is called the explicit content detection. And this, I think, is one of the things that goes unrecognized as one of the most important things for social media, especially in a day and age where there's malicious content and, well, harmful, not suitable for work content being posted all over the internet. It's the internet, so you shouldn't be surprised. But if you're building out a platform, you want to be able to detect explicit content off the go. And this is where AI can play a vital role into eliminating that before it gets uploaded, which is amazing. Because if it does and it's shown on your, platform, that can cause some big reputation damage. Explicit content can come in all types of forms, and what I think is important is understanding why it's important to really be able to have an AI detect and handle this properly. While we are looking at images are just one form of explicit content. If we consider images per se, we usually consider explicit content as stuff like nudity and not suitable for work content. Now, these are usually identified by things like skin tone and other options, and by doing so, we're able to filter those out before they become a problem. And on top of that, explicit content can also be things where maybe users are maliciously trying to get access to another user's account. Now, in those cases, they come under something called phishing detection. And phishing detection is, again, something interesting that AI is actually getting smart at being able to handle and complete. Sometimes people place inside of text or even images with text explicit phishing requirements where maybe someone might win a prize, or maybe they're asking for a password reset, or what's more, there's quite a few different types of examples of phishing that can happen. And what's important is for a social network to really be on the lookout for that. We've seen some pretty nasty exposures of people where their private information just got out, and that can cause some devastating reputation damage. So it's one of those things that you want to be on the lookout for. But with the vast amounts of users that would be on a social platform, it just wouldn't be feasible to do without an AI being able to handle that. So it's just another consideration to take into mind. So now that we understand a little bit more about some of the things that AI can facilitate with, let's have a look at where we can take this. And really, we'll need to take it into the copyright protection area. Because as you can imagine, with people being able to upload anything on the web, being able to protect your copyright is probably going to be quite important for users and creators creating photography themselves and not wanting people to just copy it or any old place. Copyright is essentially being able to, use other people's material on your platform or your platform's material being used out in the web. But what it means is that a user who's put a lot of work into, say, going out and taking a beautiful photo of a landscape, not having that stolen. Now, AI, basically machine learning, can now capture and identify these things in ways that it could never do so before. So let's take a breakdown into how this works. What can happen is that as you're uploading content, an AI detection for copyright can find and identify the images that are no longer in the public domain to be used freely, but actually copyrighted, and let you know, being able to take these down before they actually have a copyright claim placed on you, which you are the provider of that content as a social media provider, that you then need to pass on to your user. Instead, you can take that down immediately. You can identify where it came from, and you can even alert the user as to its significance. Copyright infringement, well, it comes with a lot of fines, even jail time. And being able to make sure you don't take liability for that is why it's so important. Something you might not know is that copyright is automatically assigned to the image creator upon the image work's creation. This means that every single type of image out there is actually protected by copyright, making copyright infringement more common than you would probably think. And it's also easy to participate in having copyright abuse unknowingly without having proper detection in place. There are some pretty hefty fines when we come to copyright. There are the actual damages, which are often paid by the owner and holder, where they have to prove that infringement actually caused them financial and reputational harm. And this is where we move on to some significant costs from things like statutory damages. And those are where works are registered for abuse for a number of reasons, such as removing the watermarks on a piece of work or logo, or removing the metadata and the original copyright information, or republishing it all without the author's permission, and lots more. And all of these can actually even create criminal penalties when you're abusing these. It's things you don't want to be attached with. Every single country has slightly different laws when it comes to copyright protection. So you want to understand what they are in your country, or you want to make sure that you mitigate them by having copyright identification and detection policies in place so that you can remove these before they become a problem. Let's take a closer look at the copyright considerations when building out a platform like this. And this will give you a broad idea of how copyright works, which will be useful for any type of situation. First, we'll take a look at copyright registration. It is a solution that allows creators to register their content with the government. It's actually a very common solution for websites and startups, as it allows them to control their content and how it's used. It's also a popular choice for social media platforms, as it allows you to fully control the content that's used. Copyright licensing, on the other hand, is a solution that allows creators to license their content to other users. It's also a common solution for websites and startups, but it's more popular for social media platforms as it allows them to also understand how their data and images and content is shared. Now, copyright image intelligence is being able to now factor these items into an AI platform that can detect and identify and alert you as to which one of these are in current use and how to handle them properly. A common example of what copyright intelligence might look like is this example right here, where we can see an object has scanned an image and produced this result here, where we get more details about the image. We get information about the keywords that are being applied for this image, and we're also getting information about where it originally came from, whether it is a freely licensed image or whether it is not. And all of these can help you create a platform that is freely used without the worry for copyright, well, lawsuits, essentially. Now, these are all just some basic bits of information for building a social platform. And this is just a subvariant of that for just images alone, and having a look at all these considerations for doing that. And yet, if you were to try and put this all on your shoulders to complete, you would need teams and teams of developers just to build out this one small aspect. It would be nearly impossible. And there are actual studies being performed by research groups to determine whether or not AI can completely replace humans for creating copyright detection. And the verdict is not just yet. You need some human oversight. However, there is a recommendation that any type of copyright that is happening should have some sort of human analysis, checking and making sure that the training sets and the valid data sets and the methods and methodologies around conducting this sort of checking is both automated but moderated with good algorithms in place. Now, if, for example, you are creating a social network, considering to create a copyright checking system and having a AI take place that you're training out and making sure that it is working properly over hundreds of thousands of different types of data sets would make it extremely difficult. It's not something that I can even imagine doing so myself. It's actually one of those things that you would maybe need an entire company to do. And this is just, again, one nuance of the entire dynamic of just uploading images, in the entire dynamic of creating a social network platform, in just the content itself. It gives you a small insight into just how many aspects there are to consider. And this brings me to the last part of this webinar. Well, understanding all of these considerations for this one subsection of building out a social media platform, just the images themselves and uploading them and utilizing them properly, would need a team of developers working over a long period of time just to get done kind of well as an MVP, not even being able to implement everything. And knowing this, knowing how expensive and difficult it can be, brings me to the group that we're going to be looking at today, which is Filestack. Now, Filestack also helped me run this webinar, and I think that it's worthwhile understanding what they do and why they do it, because it plays a vital role into everything we've talked about so far. Filestack essentially takes all of this on board themselves to do for you. It's no wonder that large organizations such as TED Talks or Coca-Cola or SendGrid are utilizing their infrastructure and their platform to do all of this without having to worry about having developers themselves trying to keep this up to date and working and all of that. And it's why it's one of those ones that if you're ever building out a website, if you're building out a social media platform, if you're building out any platform to upload content, especially images, you understand the strengths that you get, because everything we've talked about in this webinar, they can do without you having to lift a finger, which is insanely cool. But hopefully this leaves you with a little bit of knowledge, just at a high level, and yet there's so much to it, and it's so interesting. So I hope you guys did enjoy this. If you did, make sure you follow me up on Instagram and on Twitter and on all these other platforms. And I'd love to reach out and talk to you as well, because there's always so much fun and interesting topics that we can do. Otherwise, I'll definitely see you in the next webinar.
All right. Thank you so much, Adrian. We hope that this gives you all an in-depth look at some of the key considerations you should examine when looking to start or improve your own social media. Like Adrian mentioned, trying to manage all of these aspects on your own would take teams of developers and could slow your product coming to market. At Filestack, we can provide you with a robust and scalable solution to all of the areas mentioned in the video, from dynamic image filters to automatic copyright searches. We offer a variety of different plans based upon the level of content and specific features that your application requires, and can work with you to customize a plan to fit your exact needs. We hope that you will check out our page today to learn more about how Filestack can assist you as you bring your ideas for a content-based platform to life. If you have any questions about Filestack or the webinar today, please feel free to direct them to support@filestack.com. Thanks so much for coming.